Okay, Bismillah, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulillah, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Hope everyone is well. Welcome to the second and final revision session for academic year 6. Zafar, alhamdulillah, finished 2 chapters, 2 sections from last week, and today, inshallah, we'll be doing finishing off the Qibla section, facing the Qibla, which Zafar started last week, and doing the entirety of the Niyyah session, everything to do with the Niyyah. And with that, we will have completed all of the conditions of the preconditions, the shurut of the Salah. We did start the descriptions of the prayer this academic year, but we've not included them in our revision sessions because it would have been a little bit disjointed. So we're going to include the description of the prayer in next year's revision sessions, inshallah. So don't that omission from this year's study is deliberate. So we'll include that description of the prayer when we cover that next year fully, inshallah. Okay, so everyone should be able to access the PDF from which is the presentation I'll be going through now. I'm going to share my screen, so you should be able to download that from the portal, either now or after the class. Okay. So everyone should be able to see my presentation. We're starting with facing the Qibla. So we've got the text written at the top, and then we'll go through the discussion in a summarized format and then finish off with questions as we do normally. So the text says, it is obligatory for the one who is close to the Qibla to face it exactly, whereas it is sufficient to face it in its general direction for the one who is far away. Okay, so we see here at the Hanbali Madhab is making differentiation between our distance to the Qibla and the ruling then about how strict we have to be about facing the Qibla. So all the madhabs make this distinction that if you are close to the Kaaba, or more accurately, if you can see the Kaaba, then it is obligatory that you must face its direction exactly, because you can see it. The further away you get from the Qibla, then the issue becomes more lax, because it's harder for us to face the Qibla directly, exactly. So in Sharia, as things become more difficult, then the matter becomes more easy for us. And so that's where this differentiation between being directly in front of the Kaaba, being you have to face it, it's obligatory to face it exactly, and being further away is sufficient to just face in its general direction. But the key point to note here is that we're not saying if you're far away from the Qibla that you don't have to face the Qibla. No, you have to always face the Qibla. All we're saying is there's a practical difference on how you do so. When you're close to the Qibla, obviously you can face it directly, but when you're further away, it's a lot harder practically. So you just face its general direction. It's not saying you don't have to face the direction. It's not important. It's still absolutely critical. It's a shurut of the salah, but it's just saying that the matter has become easier for us because it's become harder for us. So the Sharia makes it easy for us. So when things become hard, the Sharia makes it easy. So it's that very key point to bear in mind. So when you're close, the whole body must be facing the Kaaba, because your ability to see it and know where it is with absolute certainty is there. Therefore, it is obligatory. But we know in the Kaaba there's many construction works going on. So you might be close, let's say 20 meters, you may be 50 meters from the Kaaba, but because of the construction work, you can't see it. So facing its general direction becomes then, even if you're, let's say, 50 meters away, if you can't see it, then the general direction becomes more, the matter becomes a lot more flexible for us. But generally, the further away you get from the Kaaba, the easier the matter becomes. And if we were to be that precise and say you must face the Kaaba directly, whether you're far away or close, the majority of the people will not be facing the Qibla. So, I mean, if you imagine the Kaaba itself is about 36 foot by 46 feet. So those are the sides of the Kaaba, 36 feet by 46 feet. If you're praying in Medina, let's say, the Kaaba will be due south of you. And there's a hadith which we're going to come to a bit later, that the Prophet ﷺ, when he was in Mina, he prayed and he was leading the prayer, and there was one long line behind him. So if that line is one long line, is over 36 feet, for example, then guaranteed that full line is not going to be hitting the wall of the Kaaba. Some of them will, some of them won't. So that's an evidence to show that when you're further away, the Prophet ﷺ didn't tell them to repeat the prayer because they were facing in its general direction. We also have a hadith of Abu Ayyub al-Ansari radiallahu anhu, that the Prophet ﷺ, he said that for the east is a Qibla and for the west is a Qibla. So what does that mean? It means generally that when you're in the east, the west is the Qibla, and when you're in the west, the east is the Qibla. And this would also apply north and south, so the compass points from where you are. So again, this is talking in a general method, that the language is general, that when you're far away, you face in the general direction. And we get this concept here that, okay, so now you've got a general direction, what are our parameters for variance? So can we, I mean, east to west on the compass direction is about 180 degrees. So can we face 180 degrees the direction? And obviously that's probably too much. But what we're saying is, 10 to 15 degrees, 5, 10, 15 degrees, this kind of thing being out, not facing the Qibla, this is okay. This kind of variance is acceptable. You're facing the general direction. So that's what we gain from this hadith. We also see from a hadith, which is, incidentally also reported by Abu Ayyub al-Ansari in Bukhari, when the Prophet ﷺ, he said, do not pray facing, do not go to the toilet, answer the call of nature when you face the Qibla or have your back to it. Rather, move slightly to the left or slightly to the right. So we see this concept of not being exactly specific, slightly away to the left, slightly away to the right. This concept of being, it's not precision exact, but it's just about moving yourself slightly is enough. And so it works both ways in terms of facing the Qibla and also facing away from the Qibla. This slight degrees, the variance in degrees slightly, this is where the Sharia has become relaxed upon us because we're further away. So we say the class position, that is obligation, the obligation to face the Qibla directly, the Kaaba directly, exactly when you're close and you can see it. And it's sufficient to face the general direction when you are far away. Okay. So now we move on to the next section, which is determine the direction. So the text says, if one is informed by a reliable person of the direction of the Qibla with certainty, or he sees the mihrab of the Muslims, then he can follow either. If he is traveling, he uses the celestial pole, otherwise known as the North Pole, or the sun or the moon and their cycles. If there are two mujtahids who don't know the direction and they are making an attempt, one does not follow the other one. As for the muqallid, with one who does not have knowledge, they follow the one that they feel is most trustworthy. So I've kind of summarized this now into 5 basic methods of determining the direction of the Qibla, which is mentioned in the text. So the first one is following another person. The second is using the Islamic prayer niches, which is known as the mihrab. The North Star, the sun and the moon and their cycles. The fourth is mujtahids who are differing. And then the fifth is a muqallid, someone who doesn't have knowledge. How do they identify the direction of the Qibla? So starting right at the top, is following a person. So we see that the Hanbali madhab has specified 2 characteristics of this person. Number 1 is that they must be certain of the direction of the Qibla, and number 2, they must be trustworthy. So that's the opinion of the Hanbali madhab. However, the class position is that they don't need to be certain. The only characteristic required of the person that you ask is that they must be trustworthy. Another important point that we can take from this is that only one person is required. You don't have to ask multiple 3 or 4 people. You just have to ask one trustworthy person, and this is sufficient. Your burden of responsibility is now lifted, that you've done your bit, you've asked one trustworthy person. And this is how the Sharia is. Establishing things between, when you go into a court of law, you're now dealing on the most part with the rights of other people. And so that's when witnesses, two witnesses come in, multiple witnesses come in when you're dealing with the rights of people. With Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's all forgiving, He's understanding in a different way that we can never imagine. So when it comes to His rights, then this level of, we have to go and get 4 witnesses and that kind of thing, we don't see it as much. So 1 witness is enough in establishing the direction of the Qibla. Then the point that Sheikh Abu Isa also mentioned in class is, what about following a non-Muslim? And we see classically and historically that in the pre-modern time, the Muslims would not follow the disbelievers in a number of things, but 2 things which were quite common were the direction of the Qibla and in medical operations or medical things which are of a medical nature. Obviously, there's a lot more discussion, a lot more detail that goes into this. But in the pre-modern era, we see that obviously the world was a different place. The interaction between the Muslims and the non-Muslims was very different to it as it is now. And so we see that in the texts and in the opinions of the scholars at the time. So they would say you wouldn't follow a person, a non-Muslim, when they tell you where the Qibla is, because generally there was a lot of distrust, and the situation amongst the Muslims and the non-Muslims was different. Obviously, now the time we live in a non-Muslim country. The majority of people are trustworthy, and so you can ascertain the Qibla direction. You may not even ascertain where you wouldn't ask them where the Qibla is. You'll just ask them where is southeast, for example, or which way is north. And for the people from that area, local area, they're going to tell you. They don't have any real intention to mislead you. But the only way it would be impermissible to ask a non-Muslim is that if this person is going to deliberately mislead you. So that one person can be Muslim, or it can be non-Muslim as well, as long as they're not trying to mislead you. Okay, number 2, the second method that has been mentioned in the text is Islamic prayer niches. So the mihrab is the section in the masjid at the front where the imam stands, and it is typically being used when you walk into a place and you see where the mihrab is. Straight away that's where the imam stands, that's the way the imam faces, and so that is the Qibla. So the reason he mentioned Imam Hajawi rahimahullah Islamic prayer niches, he's talking opposed to Christian and Jews, because certainly in the olden times, maybe not so now, but churches and synagogues would be facing towards Baytul Maqdis. They would face into that direction. And why would that be important? Because we don't even pray into that direction. Well, we know that, especially in the Arab Peninsula, or in the Arabian, in Arabia, that Baytul Maqdis is a direct opposite direction to Makkah. So where Baytul Maqdis is, the opposite direction would be Masjid al-Haram. So that's why they would use it. But they said, no, you can't use the Christian and Jews prayer directions. The word altar, the word altar, and where they put the altar in the Christian churches often, or used to be, the direction of Baytul Maqdis, and likewise with the Jews, they did the same kind of thing. But we said, number 1, their method is not going to be as accurate. We can't really trust it as much. And number 2, that method has really died out now, and so we're not going to follow the direction of any of these mihrabs except the Muslim or the Islamic ones. So when you go into a musalla kind of place, not a masjid where the 5 daily prayers are established with the imam, a regular imam, rather a musalla like in a mosque or a hospital or in an airport, places where people are just coming and going. You walk into these places, you don't know where the Kaaba is. There'll be a mihrab, there might be a section, and you can use that to establish where the Kaaba is, and that is fine. That is allowed. Okay. The next is using the North Star, the sun and moon, and their cycles. So the North Star has always been, since the beginning really of history and time, the stars have been used to navigate. Likewise, the sun and the moon and their cycles. Because all you need from the sun, the moon, and the North Star, you just need one compass point, and with one compass point you can find all the other compass points. So as long as and the sun rises in the east, sets in the west. North Star obviously pointing to the north. The moon moves in the sky from east to west. So these things can be used to identify one compass direction. And as soon as you got one compass direction, you can find out all of them. And so obviously these are the classical methods, but really the class position is that any method that accurately identifies the direction is permissible, because the objective here is to follow find the direction of the Qibla. So that's the objective. Any method that does it accurately, then that's what we're going to follow. And important point to mention here is that the Islam is for everybody. It's not for just the technical minded. It's for the simple people as well, people who don't have access to technology. It's basically a method has to be practical for all people. So we see that in these things, following a person, using mihrabs, using the sun and the moon, very simple things. We're not using, it doesn't have to be all based on super specific technology that not everybody has access to. If you don't have your GPS and that kind of thing, you use the sun and the moon, and we've become very distant from these things in our modern time. But being able to use these, identify where the North Star is, understand the moon when it's moving through its cycles, is very important, because sometimes if we don't have technology, we can still find out where the Qibla is. Okay, the fourth way is, or fourth scenario might be where two mujtahids are differing. So a mujtahid here, we're talking the linguistic meaning, where someone jahada is striving or putting in effort. So we're not talking about the scholarly level of mujtahid. We're just talking about the linguistic meaning, someone who knows how to identify where the Qibla is. They know maybe the North Star, the sun and the moon, etc., and their cycle, so that they know these things. So they're putting in effort, they're putting in a juhad to identify where the Qibla is. Now, there's two people doing the same thing, and they differ. Maybe they've got totally opposite directions, or they're slightly out a little bit. The Hanbali madhab is saying when you've got two people together and they're differing, they can't follow each other. Whereas the class position is, yes, they can follow each other. Why is that? Is because ijtihad in its very definition is a best effort. It's a best guess on the evidence that you have. It's not exact. Neither of the two people who are doing ijtihad are 100%. So the very nature of ijtihad is that it is imperfect. So whether you follow your own ijtihad or somebody else who's qualified their ijtihad, it's the same thing. So you are allowed to follow them, and that is the class position, even if both are not sure, because the whole point of ijtihad is that you do your best try, your best effort, and go forward with that. And he raises a question: are you, when you've got ijtihad differences, are we allowed to follow different people who have got different positions to ourselves? And we say absolutely. And there's a maxim that differences in secondary fiqh matters are ignored when it comes to following one another. So, for example, when you're in the prayer, the imam may be Shafi or Hanafi, and the follower may be another madhab. And so they are, for example, one person may have wiped over his socks as a follower of another madhab, whereas the Hanafi madhab doesn't allow that, only allows leather socks. But it's a valid ijtihad, even though you don't find it acceptable as a Hanafi. It's a valid ijtihad, so you can follow them in that. The prayer will be valid. The prayer is not invalid. You can follow them in that. Likewise, rafa yadayn, raising of the two hands. Shafi Imam will do that. The Hanafi won't. These things there's laxity in these areas. Following one another in these matters is not a major thing. And so it's an important maxim, and it's practical. We can't live amongst each other with all these differences unless there is that scope to follow each other in these secondary matters in fiqh. And even in sometimes they're not so much secondary matters. They might be quite important matters. And even people who are wrong, for example, like just citing the moon for Ramadan, that a person may spot the moon, they know they're qualified, they know what they're doing, but they make a mistake. So we've taken their witness that they've spotted the moon, and we start Ramadan, or we do Eid, and then maybe they were wrong, but that error is not a problem because it's overlooked. So it's not so much necessarily about being absolutely super specific, absolutely spot on right. It's about doing your best effort in the right way and following each other in a communal way. And so that's very, very important. These differences shouldn't split people apart, and there should be understanding and accommodation when it comes to this. So this point is very important when it comes to mujtahids differing. The very essence of ijtihad is that you're not 100%, so following each other is permissible. And the fifth scenario is a muqallid, someone who doesn't have the knowledge of identification of the direction of the qibla. What do? Well, they follow someone who they consider to be most trustworthy, and there is no more that would be obligated upon this person in identifying the direction of the qibla. Okay. Okay, whoever prays without making efforts to discern where the qibla is, or without following someone else's ijtihad, they must repeat the prayer if they were able to find someone to follow. The one who is aware of the indicators of the qibla must make effort to discern it for each prayer. He then prays according to his new judgment and does not make up the first prayer. Okay, so there are two ways to establish the qibla. Essentially, the most simplest ways are, number one, ask someone who knows, and number two, make your best effort, do your ijtihad based on the methods we discussed in the last slide. So what it's saying is, the Hanbali position is that if you had the ability to ask someone, or you knew how to identify the qibla and you didn't make any effort, and then you prayed, then your prayer would be invalid. You would have to repeat the prayer. And that is certainly the class position. You made no effort. You know how to identify the qibla, and you also had the opportunity to ask someone who knows, and you didn't take advantage of either of those opportunities, then your prayer would be invalid. You'd have to make that prayer up again. Interestingly, what happens if you did that, meaning you didn't ask anyone, you didn't make any effort to discern where the qibla direction was? You had to choose a direction to pray. Ultimately, you just did it by random choice, and let's say by accident you got it correct. So does this person have to follow? Do they have to repeat the prayer because obviously they had a chance, they didn't make effort, and they didn't ask anybody, but they happened to get it right? And the Hanbali madhab would say yes, they would have to repeat it. But the class position here is that if they got it right, they wouldn't have to repeat their prayer. If they got it right by accident, then they wouldn't have to repeat the prayer, but they're doing a sinful act by not putting in the correct effort that is required, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has requested of them. So this is a sinful thing. But because they prayed the salah in its time, in the direction was correct, then the prayer would be technically valid. Also interestingly, in the text, it mentions traveling. So that whilst one is traveling, it mentions this earlier on in the text. If anyone's got the full text, if you look above at the beginning of the section, it will say whilst traveling. So, and this paragraph that we're talking about follows on from that. So what it's saying is, the Hanbali madhab is that these ijtihad methods of ijtihad are only applying in travel. So what it's saying is, the Hanbali madhab is saying that you can only exercise ijtihad when you're traveling, because residency always gives you the option to ask somebody else. You always have a chance to ask somebody else. The class position here is that it doesn't matter whether you're traveling or a resident, you are allowed to do ijtihad, and that's valid, and the prayer will be valid as well. And regardless if they got it right or wrong, because they made effort, they did the ijtihad, they prayed, they got it right or wrong, it will be accepted, that will be lifted from them. And whoever prays without ijtihad or asking a person, they only repeat the prayer if they got the direction wrong. If you got the direction accidentally correct, then the prayer is not repeated. That is the class position regarding the person who does not discern or does put in effort to discern where the qibla is. The one who is aware of the indicators of the qibla must make effort to discern it for each and every prayer. He then prays according to his new judgment and does not make up the first prayer. So the general principle here in Sharia is that once you've made your best effort, then that's it. You don't need to keep doing it for every single prayer. So you don't keep repeating that effort unless there's a reason to do so. Otherwise, scholars, muftis, shuyukh would be constantly, correcting their opinions all the time. At the end of the day, once you've made your best effort, you've done your ijtihad, you've asked somebody, that's it. You remain upon that now until circumstances change, and then you ask again. You don't keep asking the same question when the parameters of the situation haven't changed. You don't ask a fatwa over and over again if the parameters haven't changed. You only ask when the parameters have changed. You only ask once, you get your answer, you act upon it. When the parameters change, then you ask again. So here we're saying you don't, just because you're traveling, you don't need to keep checking for every single prayer. What if you've camped in a particular area, you've stopped, you're staying in a hotel in a particular area, you work out the Qibla once, you don't have to keep reworking out the Qibla for every prayer because you did it on the first one. Now, unless there's a reason, like for example, you move location whilst you're traveling, now you have to do it again. So you were in one location for Dhuhr, you moved 50 miles, 100 miles, you drove to another location, then obviously now for Asr, you're going to do a new Qibla direction because you've moved, because there's a reason to redo your effort. So if there's no reason to redo your effort of discerning where the Qibla is, then you remain upon your original ijtihad. It's very, very important. And that's why we've put the principle that ijtihad cannot be cancelled out by ijtihad. It's a very important principle. Even if you find out you were wrong, so you do ijtihad to your best of your ability, you find out later that you were wrong, then it doesn't cancel it out. It just, that ijtihad was valid at its time, and then you do ijtihad again, and now that ijtihad a second time is valid in its own time. So every ijtihad is in its own time and place and scenario. It's valid when you did it the first time. Let's say you realize you made a mistake, you do ijtihad again, and the second time, that's valid as well. Both first and second time are valid. We can't say that all previous ijtihad becomes invalid, because then you'd never end, because maybe the second one is going to be incorrect. You might find out the third one is incorrect. And we see Sheikh Abu Isa mentioned Abdul Razak in his Musannaf fatwas of Umar radiallahu anhu about separating inheritance. One time he included blood brothers from inheritance, and other times he blocked them off. And when people questioned him about having blood brothers, one scenario being allowed and one scenario not being allowed, when he was questioned about this, he said that was for then and this is for now, meaning my ijtihad then was valid and correct for its time, and my ijtihad now is valid. I may have changed my opinion, may have got more information. So ijtihad cannot be cancelled out by ijtihad. They're both valid in their time and their circumstance. So the class position is you must make your one's best effort to determine the direction, and this effort is only repeated if there's a reason to do so. Okay, now moving on to intention. So we do a little introduction into intention, and then we go into the text. So the technical definition of the intention is, it's a determination to do an act of worship to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So very important, it's not the act itself, rather it's the determination to do that act. It's the determination to do that act. And Shaykh Uthaymeen, he mentions that there's two parts of a niyyah. Number one is who you're doing the act for, who you're intending. So for example, are you doing this act for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for an idol, or for praise? So who are you doing this act for? And the second part of the niyyah is what action are you actually doing? So for example, I've put on the slide the two sunnah of before Fajr and the two fard after the sunnah. They're 2 unit prayers, 2 sunnah, 2 fard. If you prayed them consecutively at home, for example, there's no outward difference between the 2 prayers. They are identical. The only difference between the 2 sunnah and the 2 fard is the intention. That's the only difference between the 2 prayers. Outwardly, physically, from the outward, someone looking in, it will just look like you pray 2 units and then you pray 2 units again. What's the difference? Only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows, and that's your intention. Your intention is specifying exactly what you are doing. The first intention is for sunnah, and the second intention is for fard. So that's the two parts of the niyyah. Niyyah identifies and clarifies who you're doing an action for, and it also clarifies and identifies exactly what action you are intending and doing. So it's very, very important. Generally, the first one is where aqidah matters fall in, and the second one is basically where the fuqaha and fiqh comes in, identifying these things. So this is a very common question, probably has been mentioned many times, but the niyyah, is it an action of the tongue or the heart? And we say obviously that the niyyah is an action of the heart. It is not a dhikr. So we see people verbalizing the niyyah, very common, and it's now become such a rife habit. People feel if they don't verbalize the niyyah that they haven't made the niyyah. When in reality, niyyah is something which exists in the heart, but the verbalization is just a verbal utterance of what already exists in the heart. So this is why we've put the difference between dhikr and an intention, and niyyah. What's the difference between dhikr and niyyah? So a dhikr, a very simple three-step process Shaykh Abu Isa explained to us. The mind, the senses perceive something and processes it. That processing in our mind and our senses, that recognition enters the heart, and the heart remembers Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And as a result of that remembrance of Allah, this remembrance is then expressed and becomes audible upon the tongue. So you see the whole process, you see a beautiful landscape, you remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, His power, His glory, and you say subhanallah. That whole process is the concept of dhikr. However, intention is only points 1 and 2. The mind perceives something or thinks of something, the heart recognizes and makes a firm conviction to do it. This is what intention is. There's no third step to now make it manifest upon the tongue. Now, where did it come from? We said that this was, I think Shaykh Abu Isa mentioned it was mentioned and it came into the ummah for a need and a necessity and a good intention it was actually created for, because intention is absolutely essential. Without intention, our actions are invalid. For the vast majority, our actions will be invalid if our intentions are not correct. So how do you teach people something which is not physically seen or heard? Well, they taught people by saying, okay, you need to, as young children, say the niyyah. Say that you're praying 2 units of sunnah prayer for the fajr, facing the Kaaba, behind the imam as a follower, etc., etc., as we know. And this gets people and children especially into the habit of understanding what they're doing. It's like training wheels. Verbalization of the niyyah is like training wheels. It teaches people the concept of niyyah, that you have to be clear what you're doing. And once you have understood that and you grow up, there's no need to verbalize it anymore. You are able to make that intention yourself. But the problem is people leave those training wheels on their whole life, so much so they feel they can't ever take them off. And so that's a big problem. But the intention is clearly, it is a action of the heart. Moving on to the very famous hadith of Umar radhiyallahu anhu, where the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, "Innama al-a'malu bin-niyat wa innama likulli imrin ma nawa." That every action is often translated as every action is based upon their intention, and every person will have that which they intended. However, Shaykh Abu Isa, he mentioned a translation of this, an understanding of this hadith, which I found was extremely beneficial. And I've written the translation that we did in class of this, the translation of that hadith, which I just said, "Innamal a'malu bin-niyat." The first half, "Innamal a'malu bin-niyat," that every conscious act has an intention behind it as its driving force that brought it about. Every conscious act has an intention behind it as its driving force that brought it about. And each person shall have that which they intended. So this was a factual statement of the Prophet ﷺ, that basically every single conscious act that we do, an intention of some sort brought about that action. Because insan, as humans, making intentions comes very naturally to us. And in fact, to do something without an intention is very difficult. Even if we move our hand from our lap, we may have moved it because we were uncomfortable. And so we moved our hand. We may have blinked or sorry, that's not a good example so much, but let's say we blew our nose. Because why do we blow our nose? Because something was stuck there, something was irritating. There was a reason for the action. Every single thing that we do has a reason behind it, because we are reasoning creatures, reasoning creations, that we do things based on reason. Now, that reason may be faulty or correct. That's not the point. The point is everything we do has a reason behind it. And then that's why that's the first part of the hadith. And the second part of the hadith then clarifies, you will be then given according to that. If your reasoning and your intention was bad, you will be given rewarded according to that bad intention. And if your reasoning and your intention was good, then you will be rewarded for that as well. So it's very, very important. So when we understand this hadith, this introduction to what is the niyyah is basically something very simple. It's not complex. Pretty much every action that we do has an intention behind it. When you go to pray dhuhr, when you're sitting on your sofa at home and you just said, okay, it's dhuhr time, when you get up and walk up the stairs to do wudu, you've made your niyyah for dhuhr. The fact that you're doing wudu, you've made that intention to pray. That's as simple as it is. And so likewise with wudu, when you go into the bathroom and you turn the tap on, that turning the tap on, you have intention to make wudu. So the intention is already there. It's not something special that you have to do. It's a very natural thing. It comes to us just by thinking and contemplating. It's just something we do very naturally. There's an intention behind it. And sometimes it's so natural, we think we haven't made an intention. But the reality is, as the hadith we've translated, is that every conscious act has an intention behind it, as a driving force that brought it about. So that's what the intention is. Very simple, really, when we think about it like this. Okay, so now from the conditions of the intention, from the conditions. So we're talking about from the conditions of the prayer. First one is the last one is the intention. So we've been through about probably about this is the sixth condition. We've been through 5 previous conditions. This is the 6th and final condition of the prayer. So from the conditions, the 6th one now in our text is the intention. What is that? It is obligatory to specifically intend that exact prayer. Okay, so we mentioned this in the slide. There's 2 types of prayer. Number 1, a specific prayer, where dhuhr, asr, istikhara, where intention is required. And then you've got a non-specific prayer, which is just general nafil, which you're just praying for no particular reason. It's not like a legislated act. You're just praying to nafil for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. For these ones, intentions are not required. So we have to understand there's a difference between the prayers that are being done. There are specific prayers which have got a specific either a text from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam that he did or he advised, told us to do these 2 rakahs. And then there's ones which are not specific, ones which you just can pray at any time, pretty much any time, any place. You just pray them, just nafil for worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. No other reason except from that. So there's a difference between the 2, and the rulings regarding the 2 are vary as well. So the Hanbali position is that you must, for let's say for dhuhr, you have to specifically intend dhuhr. For asr time, you have to specifically intend asr prayer. And the class position we said is that the exact prayer is not required specifically, but as long as you're intending the salah of that time, it will be sufficient. Or as long as you know you're doing an obligatory salah of that time, this is sufficient to be a valid intention. Like I mentioned, that when you're sitting on your sofa and you know it's dhuhr time, you have to pray. So you get up and go and pray. You haven't intended dhuhr, you just intended, right, it's dhuhr time, I'm going to go up and pray. So that is enough of an intention to be valid for the dhuhr prayer. That's according to the class position. However, the Hanbali position, actually the majority position, is that you have to specify the exact prayer, right, I'm intending dhuhr salah, I'm intending asr salah. So the class position is actually minority position. It's important for us to be aware of that. Very important for us to be aware of that. The majority position is that you do the specific prayer, but because we're studying these opinions, we know the detail behind these. We say that as long as you know it's the time of the prayer of that time, and or that it's obligatory, the salah you're doing is obligatory for that time, this is sufficient for the intention to be valid. It is not a condition, however, to intend the prayer to be an obligatory prayer, a prayer in its time, a prayer after its time, a supererogatory prayer, or to repeat the prayer. So what we see here is there's now further details of the niyyah. So the first one we went through is the foundation of the niyyah, that you're praying an obligatory salah, or the time has come, so now we're praying the salah of this time. That is the foundation of your niyyah. Now, when you add things on top of that, now, is this an obligation prayer or voluntary prayer? Is it a prayer on time or after its time? So ada is on time and qada is after its time. Is it a repeated prayer or not? And I've added in there as well, are you an imam or are you following? Are you intending to be a follower or you're intending to be an imam? Because we're going to do more detail on this in a few slides' time. But I've included it here. Why? Because these elements are not essential, or arkan, if you would say, for your intention to be valid. Rather, they are additional elements on top of the core intention. The core intention is that you're praying the salah of that time, the obligatory prayer for that time. That's the core niyyah. Now, everything else on top, is it nafl, on time or after time, repeated or not, if you're imam or follower, these things are in your niyyah as well, but they are additional elements. Okay, so when does one make the niyyah? The Hanbali madhab says here one makes the intention along with the opening takbir. However, it can be done a little before that, as long as the time for the prayer has entered. So we see two kind of conditions, is that the intention is done with a little time between the intention and the action. So the Hanbalis are saying that if there's a long time between the intention and the act and the prayer, that would invalidate the intention. That's the first thing. And the second thing is the time of the prayer has started. So if dhuhr starts at 1 p.m., for example, and you make the intention for dhuhr at 12:55, you make the intention for dhuhr at 12:55, dhuhr doesn't start till 1 o'clock, and then you pray, the Hanbalis are saying this will be invalid. Why? Because your intention has to be done in the time. The class position, as you can imagine, is not that once the intention is made, it remains unless something occurs to change it or break it, regardless if it was made in the prayer time or not. Basically, you cannot cancel the intention for no reason. So tajdeedul niyyah, which is renewing your niyyah, that's a different thing. Renewing your intention close to the time is from ihsan, and it's something that we should be doing, but we're not talking about that here in fiqh. We're talking about the legal validity, legal requirements for something to be valid. So yes, we should be renewing our intention, but the question we're asking here is, if you didn't renew it, you made your intention, let's say half an hour ago, you didn't renew it and you prayed, would that still be valid? We're asking that question. And Shaykh Uthaymeen was very strong on this position, and it makes sense as well, what we know about the intention, how we defined it before, that once you make a niyyah, it doesn't just disappear. You remain upon it until something takes it away. So, for example, let's say you leave the house in the morning, you're going to do some errands, you leave at 10 o'clock in the morning, and you leave with the intention, right, I'm going to go drop off the kids, go shopping, I'll stop off, pray dhuhr, then I'll go to pick up the kids again, etc. So you've got a plan, an itinerary of what you're doing in the day. So you set out with that intention, with that plan. So you've made the plan for the intention to pray dhuhr. Now that might be a couple of hours ago. Now you renew your niyyah when you get close to the salah, just before the takbiratul ihram, either with it, directly with the takbiratul ihram, starting the prayer, the Allahu Akbar to start, or just slightly before it. You can renew it, but the question we're saying is, when you made that intention at 10 o'clock, is that valid? And we're saying it is valid unless there was something that changed your plans. If your plans changed and your intention changed from what you originally planned, then you'd have to renew your intention, because it has now changed. But the point we're saying is, when an intention is made and nothing occurs to change or break it, then it remains there and it's not cancelled. We can't cancel an intention for no reason, and that's the class position. Okay, breaking the intention. If the intention is cut during the prayer, or there's some doubt, the prayer is invalidated. And if one doubts their intention, the prayer is to be restarted. So cutting or breaking the intention invalidates the prayer. There's consensus on this. For example, if you say, I'm not praying anymore, the prayer is gone. So that's, I think, pretty straightforward. People understand you break your niyyah, you say, I'm not praying. The niyyah is a shurut of salah. To pray your fard and you're praying dhuhr, and you say, right, I'm not praying dhuhr anymore, the prayer is gone. You've broken your intention, you've cut your intention, it's now gone. Now we've got another element here, which is saying, or there is some doubt. One doubts their intention. And we said that doubting your intention is a very hard scenario to actually imagine, because it's a clash of two principles. Because we know when you pray in your salah, you're praying 4 rak'ahs and you get confused. Have I done 3 rak'ahs or have I done 4 rak'ahs? Then you get confused. So how do we reconcile this confusion? Is the first principle that certainty overcomes doubt. That, okay, have I done 3 or 4? I'm certain I've done 3, so I build upon the 3 and I repeat the 4 and then do sajda sahu at the end. Sajda sahu at the end. However, with the intention, this is not exactly the same, because if you're doubting your intention, did I make my intention? Remember how we defined intention. Every conscious act has got an intention that drives it, that brought it into existence or brought it about. The very fact that you're standing in the action of the salah means that you made a niyyah to stand up and pray. So this is where two principles clash. One is certainty overcomes doubt, and number 2 is outward actions are taken into consideration when we're looking at matters. The Sharia does look at outward matters, outward actions, outward realities, and they are taken into consideration when taking a ruling on something. So here we would say the very fact, the outward actions that you're standing up and you're raising your hand, you're going to the ruku and you're going into sajda, the very fact you're doing that means you intended to pray. So it's very difficult to actually think, we're talking technically here, but to actually imagine a scenario where you genuinely didn't make intention, you just stood up like kind of sleepwalk and started praying, that's a very difficult scenario to actually to think about. Now, the exception for this is obviously people who suffer from waswas of shaitan. Shaitan always messes them up with their intention. This is to be ignored. Waswas of every type is to be ignored. Purity, oh, have you done wudu? You didn't wipe your head properly. Oh, did you do your ears? Oh, you didn't do your feet properly. Oh, you didn't go between your middle toe and your little toe. These are waswas of shaitan, and they are always to be ignored. That's wudu and purity, but also intention. Shaitan messes about with people in these particular areas hugely, purity and with the intention as well. So people who suffer from waswas, it's like a disease, it's like a sickness. So this is ignored. Always when you have waswas, these doubts are to be ignored. So that's a big lesson to everyone. When you suffer from lots of waswas, ignore the waswas. That's the only way to get out of it, is to ignore it. When shaitan sees that you are ignoring him, he leaves you. When he sees you're listening to him, you keep doing your wudu again, you keep starting your prayer again. Shaitan is loving it. He stays with you because he knows you. He listens to you. If you're going to get him to leave you alone, you have to show him you're not listening. So you ignore your waswas and you will see they will stop coming. So that's very, very important. But this is an exception. We're not talking about that. People who suffer from waswas, they ignore their doubts anyway. We're talking about normal people who are not suffering from waswas. Those are the people we are talking about. Technically then, so because I said it's a hard scenario to imagine, but technically, if you doubted your intention, you would base it upon the first principle, certainty overcomes doubt, and then you would redo your intention and start the prayer. But practically, I can't see any way where this would actually be physically manifested because of the second principle that we mentioned. So that's how we deal with doubts. Does thinking about breaking the prayer or intending to do an action that breaks the prayer, for example, walking off, if you think, right, I'm going to walk off now. Now, walking off from your prayer, even if you intend prayer by turning your body away from the Qibla and walking away, this breaks your salah. Now, does thinking to do this, does that invalidate your prayer? And we say the class position is that intending to break your prayer doesn't invalidate the prayer unless you do the act. The mere intention to break your prayer or do an action that invalidates your prayer doesn't break it unless you actually do it. If you do that action, then your prayer is obviously invalidated. But just thinking of it doesn't break your salah, because the asl is continuation of the niyyah until something breaks it. And an invalidator doesn't invalidate your salah until the invalidator is done. But the Hanbali position would say even thinking about breaking the niyyah, even having an intention to break the salah will break the prayer. What about a conditioned breakage? So for example, if you say, if Zayd speaks to me, my intention is broken, and we say conditioned breakage does not invalidate the prayer. That is the class position for that. Okay, converting now. This is the last section. There's a couple of slides here. Okay. It is permissible for one praying their obligatory prayer alone to convert it to a supererogatory prayer if there is enough time remaining. However, converting an obligatory prayer to another obligatory prayer leads to both becoming invalid. So there's two scenarios here. Praying alone, you have an obligatory, you can change it to nafil. The Hanbali madhab and the class position says this is valid as long as there's enough time remaining. Obviously, if you've got 3 minutes left for Fajr, you can't transfer your 2 fard to a nafil because you're going to miss your fard prayer. So as long as there's plenty of time, if there's 2 hours left, then yeah, you can pray. You start with two rak'ah, let's say 4 rak'ahs of dhuhr. You got plenty of hours remaining before asr, and you decide, okay, no, actually, I'm going to change this to a nafil, and you can do this. This is valid. You can do this. This is totally valid. You can change you started your prayer with 4 fard for dhuhr, and you change midway. I'm going to make this sunnah. I'm going to make this nafil. Sorry, not sunnah. I'm going to make this nafil, in the sense totally optional prayer. Then that's valid to do. The second scenario is praying alone and transferring an obligatory prayer to another obligatory prayer. So, for example, you change from dhuhr to asr. You're praying 4 rakats of dhuhr, and then you intend to say, right, no, actually, I'm not doing dhuhr anymore. I'm doing asr. This is now changing an obligatory to an obligatory. This is invalid, both the Hanbali madhab and the class position, because you cannot change from an obligatory to obligatory. Now, from these two scenarios, we can deduce the following. There's specific and non-specific, what I mentioned earlier, specific and non-specific. A specific prayer is a legislated, something with a nas, a text, dhuhr, asr, istikhara. Some scholars say wudu is also a specific prayer. There's a bit of difference on that. But these are specific prayers, tarawih. And I don't want to just say specific prayers are not just the obligatory prayers. There's sunnah prayers which are specific as well. The 4 before dhuhr, the 2 after dhuhr, the 2 after maghrib, the 2 after isha. Witr is a nafil prayer as well. These are specific sunnah prayers which are legislated by nas, by text, by the Prophet ﷺ. They're not obligatory, but they're sunnah, but they're specific sunnahs. Versus non-specific prayers, which are total nafils, which are not established by a nas. They're just general prayers, praying for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to please Him, to get close to Him. So specific and non-specific. So from this we can deduce specific to specific, both of them are invalid. Changing your niyyah from a specific prayer to another specific prayer is invalid. That might be an obligatory to a sunnah. So for example, the 4 fard of dhuhr, changing that to, like let's say you pray the 4 fard of dhuhr and you realize, I didn't pray my 4 sunnah before, I've changed my niyyah, I'll make these the 4 sunnah. You can't do that, because that's a specific obligation to a specific sunnah. You cannot do that. This is invalid. Now, a specific prayer to a non-specific prayer, for example, you're praying your 4 rak'ah of dhuhr and you want to change it to 4 nafil, this is valid. So a specific to non-specific, this is valid. A non-specific prayer to a non-specific prayer, I don't know, technically, we're just using this as a scenario because it's one of the options, but this is valid as well. And then the final option would be non-specific to a specific. So this would be you're praying just two rak'ahs for the sake of Allah, and you'll say, actually, I'm going to make these 2 rak'ahs of the sunnah before Fajr. You can't do that. The two non-specific units can't be transferred to 2 specific units of the sunnah prayer, and this would be invalid. And these are the class positions on these items. Next thing, is obligatory for the imam to intend to be an imam and for the follower to intend to be a follower. We said here it's not obligatory because what I mentioned before, being an imam or follower, are additional elements or expressions of the niyyah. They are not intrinsic to the niyyah itself. The bare minimum was to do the time of the prayer or pray an obligatory prayer. These are the bare minimum. Being an imam or being the follower, these are additional intentions which actually give the additional reward, the 25 or 27 times of praying in Jama'ah, opposed to validating or invalidating the prayer. So that's important to say. So we differ from the Hanbali madhab here. The class position is that to intend to be an imam or intend to be a follower, these are not obligations for the niyyah. Obviously, you should do them, but again, we're talking fiqh-wise. What's the evidences for this? The first hadith is of Qiyamul Layl in Ramadan. The Prophet ﷺ was praying alone, and the companions joined him. And the Prophet ﷺ, afterwards, he did not tell them to repeat their prayer. The Prophet ﷺ had started his prayer by himself. He didn't intend to be the imam. He was praying alone. The companions joined him, and so he then led them in prayer, but he didn't start off by leading them in prayer. And the second night that happened, and the third night, the Prophet ﷺ didn't come out, as we know the story, that he didn't want the Tarawih to become a obligation upon us. But the point is, he started the prayer as alone. He did not intend to be an imam, and the companions joined him, and he didn't repeat his prayer himself, nor did he tell the companions to repeat their prayer. It was valid. And even though he changed from being alone to leading them. And the second hadith is the one of Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu. He was a young boy, a child, praying. The Prophet ﷺ was praying the night prayer, and Ibn Abbas joined the Prophet ﷺ, and he stood on his left-hand side. And Ibn Abbas narrates radiallahu anhu, that the Prophet ﷺ took him by his ear, moved him from the left side to the right side, teaching him that where you stand when there's just two people praying, where does the imam stand, where does the follower stand. What's the relevance of this? The relevance is the Prophet ﷺ was praying alone, then Ibn Abbas anhu joined him, and so the Prophet ﷺ started off alone, and he then became imam afterwards. So we can't say it's an obligation for him to intend to be imam beforehand, or likewise the follower, because the Prophet ﷺ started off as alone. Okay, so that's important there. Next one. It is not valid for one praying alone to decide to become a follower, just like it's not valid for him to decide to lead an obligatory prayer. It is not valid for a follower to convert to praying alone without a legal excuse. Okay, so in this paragraph, there's three scenarios. Very simply, you're praying alone, you become a follower. Number two, you're praying alone, you become imam of an obligatory prayer. Number three, you're a follower of a prayer, and you then become alone. That text at the top of the slide is basically those three scenarios. The Hanbali says for number one, you're alone and you become a follower. So let's say you're praying alone and a Jamaat comes and they pray right next to you. And the end of their Jamaat, basically you as an individual praying by yourself, let's say, you're right on the end of the row of the Jama'ah. Someone looking at you two at the Jama'ah may think you are part of it, but they don't know you were praying first and they came afterwards. But looking from outside, it looks you're part of the row. For example, can you then, in this position, say, right, these guys are standing right next to me, I might as well join their prayer and get the reward for the Jama'ah? Humbly say this is invalid. You cannot do this because being an imam or being a follower, it's an obligation to specify this in the intention before you begin. Okay. However, the class position is that being an imam and a follower, they are not intrinsic to the niyyah, rather they are additional elements. So the class position is valid to do this. And the evidence for that is the hadith of Ramadan. The Prophet ﷺ was alone and he became imam. Why am I saying this? Because he didn't become a follower, you would say. But the question, the point is, if you can go from alone to being imam is far more greater and far more serious and far more influential as a position than a follower. So if you can go from alone to become an imam, then certainly you can go from being alone to becoming a follower. So we use the same hadith of Qiyamul Layl that we used before. The only issue would be the number of units. Let's say you're praying of Dhuhr, and Jama'ah comes and they're praying the 4 of Dhuhr. Let's say you've prayed 2 units already, and they're now obviously starting. Now, if you join them, you're going to end up praying 6 because you've prayed 2 already. They're going to pray 4. If you follow them, you're praying 6. Now, obviously, you can't do that because it's only 4. The prayer is 4 units. And then if you were to then, I mean, this is where a lot of discussion happened. So how would you handle this? You would change your intention, become a follower, and then you would finish your prayer to tashahhud, and you would just sit in tashahhud and not give your salam, wait for them to catch up, and then give salam with them, for example. So you would wait for them to catch up with wherever you are. But Shaykh Abu Isa, he said this was not really the best way to, he didn't really like doing this because the imam's to be followed. You're doing your own prayer and then sitting at the end waiting for them and just doing the salam. You're not really, the imam has been put there to be followed. And so by you not, waiting, you're not following the imam. So this is a bit of a problem here. So the best way is what we said before, that you might as well convert the specific Dhuhr prayer that you intended, change that to a nafil, which we said specific to non-specific is fine. Then once you finish, join them, and you'll get the benefit of the jama'ah. But we said, let's say there is no mismatch in the let's say there's no mismatch in the raka'at, then you can, if they just stand next to you, they start the prayer and you've just started as well, then you just change your intention to a follower and there's no mismatch, and that's fine for you to do. Number 2 is you're alone to lead an obligatory prayer. The Hanbali say it's invalid, but that's why they say they've specified specifically to decide to lead an obligatory prayer, meaning they allow it for nafil, that if you're alone and you then become an imam for a nafil prayer, that is allowed. And what's the evidence for that? It's the hadith of both Qiyamul Layl and the Ibn Abbas hadith. The Prophet ﷺ was praying alone, and the Qiyamul Layl was an optional prayer, and both in the Ibn Abbas prayer was also tahajjud, an optional prayer as well. And so they say it's allowed for nafil, but they say for obligatory you can't do it. And it's a fair point, because the 2 hadith that we're using as evidences are both nafil prayers. So how can you use nafil prayers to establish us going from being alone to leading an obligatory prayer? And we say, because we say it's valid, you can go from alone to leading an obligatory prayer. Why? The maxim is whatever is established for optional elements is established for obligatory elements, unless there's a reason to indicate otherwise. So explaining this would be the Prophet ﷺ, the companions described to us how the Prophet ﷺ prayed his salah when he was on a mount, when he was riding his camel. They said he would pray on the mount, a nafil salah, for example, and he would pray in any direction that the camel or the ride walked in. He'd pray in any direction that the camel walked in. But they said, but for the fard prayer, he didn't do this. He got down and he would pray on the floor facing the Qibla at all times. The companions narrating this, they understood to be able to highlight this point, that he did this except for the fard prayers. For the fard prayers, he didn't do this. So they understood that generally speaking, optional elements, the prayers or any obligation that we're talking about, the optional elements, whatever is established for them is established for the obligatory elements as well, unless there's a reason to indicate otherwise. And the companions knew that, which is why they indicated that for fard prayer you can't just pray on your mount in any direction, because they understood that there is a difference between obligatory and optional elements, and if there is a difference, you must specify that. And so that's where we get this from, that whatever is established for nafil is also established for obligatory elements, unless there's a reason or evidence to indicate otherwise, such as the direction of Qibla for the fard prayers and the nafil prayers. There's a clear difference there, and we have a reason to specify that separation between nafil and obligatory, so we make that separation. In the absence of a reason to differentiate between optional nafil and obligation, then we remain that on the maxim that whatever is established for nafil is established for obligatory elements. So this is the principle, that is why we disagree with the Hanbali madhab. The class position is that it's valid to go from alone to lead an obligatory prayer. Number 3, you can go from a follower to being alone only if there's a reason. So the Hanbali said this is valid, and the class position, this is valid. What's the reason for this? This is the hadith of Mu'adh bin Jabal radiallahu anhu. Basically, Mu'adh, the famous hadith, he would pray his Isha with the Prophet ﷺ in the Masjid Nabawi. Then he would go back to his locality, and obviously Mu'adh is a big scholar, a major scholar of the Deen. he would go back to his locality and he would lead his locality in salah as well, because he was a teacher guiding them and they all looked up to him. But he wanted the reward of praying with the Prophet ﷺ, so he did that first and then went back and prayed a kind of a nafil salah basically with his local community. But one night, hadith, Mu'adh bin Jabal, he prayed a long surah. He prayed Surah Al-Baqarah, and it was very difficult for the people. And a man actually broke off from the Jama'ah and prayed alone because it was too long. Mu'adh bin Jabal heard about this, and he said that this man has done, this is the action of the hypocrites. He's a hypocrite for doing this. He's broken off from the Jama'ah. He's a hypocrite. Now, this man, he didn't like being accused of being a hypocrite. He wasn't a hypocrite. He wasn't a hypocrite. And he didn't like being accused. And so he went to the Prophet ﷺ and told him of the incident. And the Prophet ﷺ, he actually reprimanded Mu'adh bin Jabal. And he said, do you want to become a fitna for the people? That why are you making the prayer so long? Why are you making the prayer so long? Making it difficult upon people? Make it easy for them. So this hadith, the Prophet ﷺ did not tell the man to repeat his prayer, because he went from a follower, he broke from the Jama'ah and finished as alone. He did not tell the man to repeat his prayer. So we say this is valid. This is valid, but there must be a reason. So what are these reasons? It can be length of the prayer. If it's too long, it's permissible to finish off alone. That's the direct evidence from that we've just quoted. If you're sick, you need to vomit, or anything else similar to that, IBS, desperate to go to the toilet, these kinds of things, it's kind of common sense things, you know, that you can, these are valid legal reasons for you to leave the Jama'ah. Then we have 4 and 5 scenarios number 4 and 5. If the regular Imam enters the prayer, which has already been started by his substitute, it's valid for the substitute Imam to now become the follower. The prayer of the follower is invalidated. If the prayer of the Imam is invalidated, there can be no appointment of a replacement Imam. That basically is summarizing 2 additional scenarios. Number 4, an Imam going to a follower. So a regular Imam of a city, he's not present, so his substitute Imam is leading the prayer. Then the normal Imam comes, so the substitute steps back and the main Imam takes his place. So the Imam has gone from being an Imam to being a follower. Humbly say this is valid, and we also say this is valid, the class position as well. And this is the hadith of Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu near the death of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Abu Bakr was appointed to lead the Muslims in salah whilst the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was so ill. One day the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was feeling slightly better, and he felt that he could possibly, you know, scrape it to the prayer. So with help, he came to the prayer after Abu Bakr had started. Abu Bakr noticed that, okay, the Prophet ﷺ is coming. So Abu Bakr stepped back, and the Prophet ﷺ, he sat down and prayed, took over the Jama'ah. Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, he became the mukabbir. He was the one who was, the Prophet ﷺ obviously was ill, his voice was weak as well. He was just saying Allahu Akbar, you know, Sami Allahu liman hamida, in a weak voice. So Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu was mukabbir, he was repeating it, so the people at the back could hear. So this is a situation where we have a direct evidence where the Imam Abu Bakr became the follower of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Number 5, a follower becoming an Imam. The Hanbali said this is invalid if the Imam's prayer is invalidated. 2 conditions. They said a follower becoming an Imam is invalid if, number 1, the Imam's prayer was invalidated first. If the Imam's prayer was invalidated, then the follower cannot become the Imam. Number 2, this only applies to the official Imam of a masjid. Okay, so the class position here, we said it's valid regardless if the Imam's prayer was valid or not. And this is the hadith of, there's the hadith of Abdul Rahman ibn Auf at the assassination of Umar radiallahu anhu. Umar radiallahu anhu was stabbed, and that's the stab that actually killed him. Abdul Rahman ibn Auf, he came forward to lead the prayer, and obviously there would have been a lot of blood coming from Umar radiallahu anhu, which would have invalidated the prayer. A lot of blood would have come out, so his prayer would have been invalidated. He also spoke as well. The dog has killed me. Umar radiallahu anhu said that. The dog has killed me, so this would have broken the prayer as well. But Abdul Rahman ibn Auf, he still stepped forward and continued from where Umar radiallahu anhu left off from. So we say even if the Imam's prayer is invalidated, the follower can step forward to become an imam and a replacement. And that's why it says there can be no appointment of a replacement in the Hanbali text. We disagree with that because yes, it can be. Just because the imam's prayer has been invalidated, it doesn't invalidate everybody else's. And not being restricted to the imam of the masjid, this basically goes back to the this point should actually be under number 4, not under number 5. So apologies there. But the imam can become a follower. This only applies to what? The imam, official imam of the masjid. So if the official imam of the masjid comes in, then you step back and let him go in. That's what the Hanbalis say. But we say no, it can also apply to someone who's superior status or position, an alim, the leader of let's say a house, someone's house. He's not here and he comes in. You can step back and let the owner of the house, he can pray. We're not talking about superior status taqwa because no one knows who's more superior in taqwa. But someone who's qualified, a judge, the scholar, the alim, the hafiz, the owner of a house, for example. He comes home and you've already started the Jama'ah. Anyone with a superior status and position that's recognized by Sharia, we can apply it here as well. The imam can step back and become the follower and allow the original main imam to come in. The Hanbalis say this can only be for the imam of the masjid. We say as a class position, it can apply to anyone who has got that superior status and position in Sharia. If the imam's prayer becomes invalidated, how do we handle this? The class position is that if the imam remembers that he'd broken his salah, if he realizes that his salah has become invalidated, maybe he passed wind in the salah, right? He knows, okay, salah is now broken. He moves and the replacement takes over. And if the imam does not, if a follower does not come forward to replace, then everybody will just finish their prayers individually. Now the key point is here, this is the class position, because the Hanbalis are saying if the imam's prayer becomes invalidated, then everybody's prayer becomes invalidated. And we say, no, this is not the case. This is not the case. Because of the maxim at the bottom, whoever enters the act of worship and fulfills it as he was commanded, he will never ever invalidate it except with a strong evidence. We can't just invalidate his prayer because of the imam. He's done everything that he's supposed to do. And the imam, he has invalidated, his prayer has become invalidated. So the follower comes forward and takes his place. And we know this from the Sunnah, this happened. And so we're not going to put this restriction there. Now, what happens if the imam realizes at home, let's say a couple of hours later, he realizes, oh, I forgot, I didn't have wudu when I led everybody in Dhuhr, for example. So here, the imam, he would have to repeat his prayer, but the followers do not repeat. Here, the imam is not obligated to tell the followers that they have to repeat their prayer, and that's based on the maxim again, which is below, whoever enters in acts of worship and fulfills it as he was commanded, it will never be invalidated except with a strong evidence. So the followers, their salah was fine, even though the imam prayed without wudu, or he broke wudu and something happened that he didn't realize and he only realized after, or maybe he had najasa on his shoes, he didn't realize on his clothes, he didn't realize at the time and he realized afterwards. His prayer would have to be repeated, but the followers don't repeat. So this is how we deal with the imam's prayer being invalidated. We do not follow the imam's prayer invalidates everybody's salah. The one exception to that was, Shaykh Abu Isa mentioned, the sutra. The sutra of the imam is a sutra of everybody, and if somebody walked in front of the sutra of the man, the imam, then it would invalidate the imam's prayer and invalidate everybody else's, and he would then obviously restart and tell everybody else to restart. This is the only exception that Shaykh Uthaymeen mentioned, but generally speaking, it's as we have mentioned. So that's the end of that. I don't know if anyone's got any questions before we finish off. I'm going to stop sharing now. So are there any questions? A couple of minutes. It doesn't look like there are any. Okay, I'm just going to have to end it there. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.